Summary of concepts. The Meditations demonstrates the key ideas, themes, and conclusions of Stoicism in relation to the world as seen by Marcus Aurelius. The modern definition of a Stoic is a person who can endure pain or hardship without showing their feelings or complaining, but this does not completely give context to Stoicism as used in this book. While Stoicism has many different interpretations, it usually refers to the belief that people have no control about what happens to them, but do have control about how they react to it. Stoicism also often includes the pursuit of self-improvement, of which similarities can be drawn to virtue theory ethics or natural law ethics. The book, despite being written in 167 A.C.E., still has relevant themes that could be interpreted today. These themes include but are not limited to generosity, leadership, justice, independence, fairness, communication, logic, and mindfulness. As well as general themes, there are also key lessons that one could easily extract from reading this book. Two of the most quintessential examples of these lessons are that life is too short to complain, and the only pain that people suffer from is more often than not self-created. As aforementioned, these lessons could also be used in real-life scenarios more often than not. In fact, people who suffer heavily from anxiety, nervousness, or any similar disorder could potentially benefit the most, as one of the key themes, mindfulness, is already used as a treatment by those suffering to find relief. Furthermore, the author, Marcus Aurelius, never intended to write the book with the intent to share with others, but the book was a series of private notes to use as a source of self-guidance. One could draw parallels with someone today reading motivational quotes before making a decision to Aurelius' purpose in writing this book. Unlike other traditional books, Aurelius, for the most part, directly explains each of these themes in his book, rather than explain indirectly through stories. The book, being broken down into 12 separate sections, is very non-structured and does not follow any particular format. In fact, each of the sections seems to be arbitrary enough that one could read them out of order and still have a firm grasp about what the book entails. Aurelius also makes a lot of bold claims that other philosophers do not seem to do. For instance, in several of his books he outright claims that evil does not exist and that men do wrong involuntarily. Whereas other philosophers and philosophical books may discuss this and speculate based on evidence, Aurelius seems to outright say things such as this. It is also interesting to mention that Aurelius mentions other philosophers such as Plato and Socrates, as well as other historical figures like Alexander the Great and Hippocrates. This seems to suggest that his book may have been influenced by these people. Therefore, Meditations is a comprehensive yet arbitrary summary of Stoicism and how to think about the world like a Stoic would. The Stoicism that Aurelius uses is mostly based on logic, logos, and focuses on self-improvement through careful reflection and mindfulness. Critical Evaluation Part 1. Meditations is a book that is very non-structured in nature. Each of the 12 sections of the book overlap on a lot of the key conclusions and do not have to be read chronologically. Furthermore, one key weakness of the book is that Aurelius does not discuss his Stoic-based claims in detail. Whenever he makes a claim, such that evil does not exist or that people have no control over what happens to them, he does not write discursively as other philosophers like Immanuel Kant or W. D. Ross tend to do. Perhaps the most quintessential example of these conclusions without reasons is when Aurelius talks about the importance of sociability. He states that intelligence of the universe is social and simply does not justify any further. This way of simply describing how things are is definitely a weakness of the book. A strength of the book is the emphasis on important virtues that agree with the natural law ethical theory and virtue theory. The themes and lessons he talks about seem to be in line with both of these theories, and generally the logic-based Stoicism can be parallel to many other theories. Aurelius also brings up many different aspects of ethics, such as talking about the healthiness of the soul and discussing the polytheistic gods, such as Zeus, of that time. The author's methodology for writing this book, although sporadic, does seem to colloquially be short and sweet. The author seems to just mention a piece of Stoic philosophy and move on, which reduces the confusion of what the theme is about. The author also puts a lot of emphasis on key virtues and sometimes disparages non-Stoic philosophy, such as, no vainglory in these things men call honors, Book 1, referring to complex and unstable pleasures that contradict the simple life that Stoicism seems to prescribe. Furthermore, Aurelius makes a lot of interesting and thought-provoking claims that make one reconsider philosophy and ethics. For example, time, and again he says that people have no control over what happens to them and that everything that happens is just, saying everything which happens, happens justly, and if thou observest carefully, thou wilt find it to be so. Book 3. This quintessentially opens up many potential and possible thoughts that were somewhat unique at that time. Aurelius also talks about other concepts other philosophers have already theorized, which is similar to other modern philosophers. For instance, Aurelius says eudaimonia, happiness, is a good daemon, or a good thing, Book 6, referring to the Nicomachean Ethics interpretation of eudaimonia. Aurelius also seems to write in a tone that seems humble and paternal. For instance, he famously opens section 1 of the book by explaining and listing what he learned from everyone, such as I learned piety from my mother. This tone of gratitude and open-mindedness can also be seen in other chapters, most notably in the quote, "If anybody can show me, and prove to me, that I am wrong in thought or deed, I will gladly change. I seek the truth, which never yet hurts anybody. It is only persistence in self-delusion and ignorance which causes harm." Book 6. This demonstrates that Aurelius embodied a very open-mind tone while writing this book. Critical Evaluation Part 2. Critical Evaluation Part 2. Perhaps the most apparent thought gathered from reading the text was that most of the lessons seemed to fall into the realm of common knowledge. The lesson that life is too short to complain and several other lessons seemed to be for remembrance rather than for being insightful. Aurelius is rather sinister, talking about the limited life that people have, saying, "Take it that you have died today, and your life story is ended, and henceforth regard what further time may be given you as an uncovenant surplus, and live it out in harmony with nature." Book 7. The dire stance, although pessimistic, seems to encompass what Stoicism thought of dying and why people must act sooner rather than later. By understanding this fact that all people will eventually die, Aurelius suggests that one cannot let the fear of death rule over our lives, and by living like a Stoic, one can make ample use of that time. One huge exception to this rule of common knowledge lessons is the other big theme, that the only true pain someone faces is self-created. Aurelius more than likely meant that by purposely choosing to do non-stoic and non-virtuous actions, someone is setting themselves up for failure and pain. For instance, under this interpretation, a college student who chooses to party rather than study for an exam is inevitably going to lead to failure of the said test and further negative consequences. Furthermore, Meditations has a similar ethical view as Nicomachean Ethics, in the sense that following the Stoic philosophy shares similar characteristics as being virtuous. In both cases, one should use communication, independence, fairness, leadership, and other traits effectively. Also, Aurelius' writing can be shown parallel to the doctrine of the mean. As before, both emphasize the importance of having virtues in being truly happy. Both also prescribe that a virtuous person will act in their own capacity to truly be virtuous. For instance, if there was a fire, a virtuous person should call authorities rather than rush in and save people inside, as they themselves might get trapped and cause further problems. Overall, the book does not seem to have much failures in reasoning, as most of what is said can be semi-justified, such as life being too short to complain, or too abstract to prove, such as saying that evil does not exist. Another interesting comparison is that Stoicism seems to be based on logic and reason, similar to other famous philosophers, namely much of the work of Immanuel Kant. In fact, much of the philosophy of the ancient Greek world seemed to influence later philosophers. The overarching theme from all the lessons and conclusions is that one must live with a strong constitution to be happy. This entails not only not being discouraged or dissatisfied in one's endeavors, but also in being open to change one's traits, such as learning to be sociable or learning how to become a leader. These conclusions, despite being written in the ancient world, encompass what Stoics believe is the key to the door to happiness. And that door, according to the Stoics, is available to anyone who truly follows the conclusions and way of life of Stoicism. Word count: 1,596 words.